Today from the global lane, Donald Trump pulls the United States out of the Iran nuclear deal. Is war between Israel and Iran next? Will Gina Haspel be America's next CIA director? Or will concerns over waterboarding sink her nomination? Millennial voters, fewer are in the bag for Democrats. We'll explain why. These stories and more. And it's all right here, right now from the global lane. President Trump has made it official. The United States is dumping out of the Iran nuclear deal. He said the accord only made it easier for Iran to make a nuclear weapon. CBN White House correspondent Ben Kennedy reports.
I am announcing today that the United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal.
An announcement that made headlines worldwide. President Trump reinstating sanctions on Iran and even imposing secondary sanctions on nations that engage with Iran.
Any nation that helps Iran in its quest for nuclear weapons could also be strongly sanctioned by the United States.
The accord was designed to freeze Iran's nuclear program in exchange for an end to economic sanctions on Tehran. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accused the Iranians of secretly developing nuclear weapons.
The deal didn't push war further away. It actually brought it closer. The deal didn't reduce Iran's aggression. It dramatically increased it.
Netanyahu called Trump's move to back out of the deal historic. President Obama, on the other hand, says it's a serious mistake. Some feel that by getting rid of the deal, Iran can start its nuclear production at a higher level. Iran's president warned Tuesday that his country may resume enriching uranium if European leaders failed to preserve Iran's benefits from the 2015 accord.
They may not, just because they're also appealing for European support, and certainly I don't think they would start a nuclear weapons program soon. But it's risky getting rid of the entire deal.
We are now respected. We are feared, and quite frankly, a lot of folks love us across this globe as well because of actions just like this. He's calling out bad actors for what they are, being bad actors, and he's standing against evil.
Now, this move to back out of the deal faces opposition from European allies and could potentially deepen the president's isolation on the world stage. France's President Emmanuel Macron tweeted that France, Britain, and Germany regret the U.S. decision. Ben Kennedy, CBN News, Washington.
Some leaders on Capitol Hill acted like we're now on the verge of an apocalypse. Iranian lawmakers chanted death to America and even burned a U.S. flag on the floor of their parliament. Well, joining us with more from Jerusalem is CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell. Chris, what's the reaction in Israel?
Well, the reaction, as you may imagine, is elation from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, from many of the members of the Knesset, from the ruling party. If there's one element, one issue that unites politicians throughout the political spectrum of Israel, I think it's the Iran nuclear deal, and the fact that they see a future possible nuclear Iran as a mortal danger. So I think Israelis, leaders here are exceptionally excited about this. And this brings, as many people think, the United States and Israel even closer.
Chris, does this now make the possibility of war between Israel and Iran more or less likely?
Well, you could look at it a couple of ways, Gary. First of all, they basically are at war. It's a low-grade war right now. Israel reportedly has been striking Iranian targets inside Syria as several times in the last few weeks. There's talk of war almost daily here in Israeli newspapers. So what's happened is that Iran, as it tries to fill the vacuum inside Syria and establish military bases inside that country, they are facing a determined Israel to prevent that from happening. They don't want Iranian military bases on its northern border. And so that's why you hear these reports of Israeli planes striking surface-to-surface Iranian missiles inside Syria. Whether this explodes into a Middle East conflagration and a direct war between Iran and Israel remains to be seen. But I would add, Gary, that I think that here in the Middle East, and you know this so much, that they respect strength. And when President Trump has nixed this deal and imposed the highest possible sanctions on Iran, that speaks volumes not only to Israel and the United States enemies, but they're friends as well, like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan.
Yeah, the old saying is peace through strength, isn't it, Chris? Some critics of Trump's actions say he based his decision on old evidence of Iranian nuclear development, nothing new since the deal was reached in 2015. Now, I know you attended a briefing, Netanyahu's presentation of evidence, so what do you think of that?
Well, I think what they did is they discovered files from Project Ahmad, which was Iran's nuclear program to design, build, and test a nuclear device. It came from 2003. But what they made certain in the presentation, made clear in the presentation, that it was Iranian information that was meant, that should have been divulged as part of the Iranian nuclear deal. It wasn't. It was hidden and stored away. And so anytime when these nuclear deal provisions expire, 10, 15, 25 years, Iran has the know-how to build a nuclear device.
So, Chris, really, it wasn't that there was any new information about a new violation of the agreement, but it was basically demonstrating, hey, you can't trust these guys. They hid this. What else are they hiding? And once this is lifted, they'll move forward quickly. Is that correct?
Exactly. And what Netanyahu has made clear, not only in that briefing, but other times as well, the deal is so bad that if Iran kept the deal, sometimes that was their worst fear, because what they did is they restricted their enrichment of uranium to a certain degree, to about 20%. But the deal allows them to continue research and development for sophisticated centrifuges. So when these calendar things change, 10, 15, 20 years, then Iran will have ability to enrich uranium at a prodigious amount. They'll have the information to weaponize that. They'll have the ballistic missile technology. So that was Netanyahu's point. Even if they keep the deal, it's so bad that it would almost allow Iran to have a nuclear, not just one device, but literally a nuclear arsenal.
It really did nothing to eliminate the program. It just contained them and kicked the can down the road. So how did other Middle East leaders react to the announcement, Chris?
Well, you see Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states applauding the move by President Trump. And this is what's happened in this unusual coalition of forces against Iran.
And some Iranian Kurds I know in the Middle East tweeted to me and sent messages to me applauding Trump's decision. They were very pleased about it. So what message, Chris, does it send to Iran on its ambitions to establish a military foothold against Israel and Syria?
Oh, a huge message. And as we said, I think when you have strength, it's respected in the Middle East. When you keep your word, it's respected here in the Middle East as well. So I think it sends a message to Iran that the United States is going to stand behind Israel as it determines to not allow Iran to establish these military bases inside Syria. And certainly a time to be praying for the peace of Jerusalem, to be praying for Israel, and be praying for all the peoples in this region, that the gospel could go forth in it, in Jesus' name.
Before she appeared before the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, Gina Haspel offered to withdraw her name from consideration as CIA director. Criticism on Capitol Hill about her involvement with the CIA's waterboarding program motivated her to forego a public congressional grilling. But Haspel was encouraged to press on. Her supporters say she is perhaps one of the most qualified candidates ever nominated to head up the CIA. Here with more is intelligence and foreign policy analyst Herb London. Dr. London is president of the London Center for Policy Research. Dr. London, thanks so much for joining us today. You know, most Americans don't know much about Gina Haspel, so tell us about her and why you think she should be our next CIA director.
Well, obviously, I'm very encouraged by the fact that she is a nominee. She has been associated with the CIA for more than 30 years. She's a person of distinct integrity. In fact, there's not one person at the CIA who has had anything negative to say. The issue that's arisen is the issue about waterboarding several years ago. And keep in mind that when the waterboarding occurred, it wasn't a decision that was made by Gina Haspel. It was made by the highest authorities in the United States. It was made going way up the chain to those people who make decisions for America. When they made that decision based on a very simple proposition. national security in the United States must be maintained. You cannot simply provide Miranda rights to al-Qaeda and say, you know something, you're going to be indicted, you're going to go into a court of law, and we will engage in a fair exchange. Al-Qaeda is here to kill Americans. We had to do everything in our power to make sure that no one was hurt. If in fact Americans were killed, people would say, why weren't extreme measures taken to make sure that that didn't happen?
Yes,
So keep in mind that there's a lot to this equation that's overlooked. In my judgment, she conducted herself in exactly the proper manner. She followed all the protocols. She did exactly what was asked of her, and she did not make this decision arbitrarily. So please keep that in mind. She worked very closely with Mr. Pompeo, who is now, of course, our Secretary of State, and she is highly regarded by him. So here is someone who ran the clandestine operation for the CIA and who has been there, as I indicated, for 3 decades and is in a position where she probably has more knowledge, more understanding, more experience with the CIA than any person in the United States.
I find it interesting that many of the same politicians who criticize her for involvement in the waterboarding of terrorists gave former CIA Director John Brennan a pass when he defended the agency's enhanced interrogation program. So is there a double standard?
Well, without question. I mean, what you have here are the Democrats who are going to say this is unacceptable behavior, but it's acceptable if a Democrat is engaged in doing it. I mean, fortunately, there are enough Republicans there to make the case for Gina Haspel, but she can certainly handle it. She's handled far more difficult situations as a CIA director.
I'm sure she has as deputy director and also in the field. Now, some of those same politicians also have criticized this president for not appointing more women to prominent positions in his administration. Is it Haspel they're really against or the president? Who's the real target here?
Well, you know, the real target is obviously Donald Trump. And any way you can get to Donald Trump through at appointees or in any other fashion, that's the Donald Trump syndrome. So I'm not at all surprised by that. What you have in the Democratic Party today is a desire to undermine this president. And while I think that there are some things that the president does that I do not agree with, on the whole, you look at the policies that have been instituted, and we've had a remarkably successful first year in the economy and even on the international front.
So what are the chances, do you think, Dr. London, that she'll be confirmed by the Senate?
I think she will definitely be confirmed. And I say definitely and underscore that word. I feel very confident about it, notwithstanding the fact she would go through a difficult period. But I wouldn't worry about it because I think in the end, this is the right person at the right time for the right job.
Now, what would her leadership then at the CIA mean for the agency and American intelligence efforts?
Well, what it means is that at a time when there's been a lot of controversy at the CIA, particularly by past directors, I think that you need someone who understands the agency, who is a person of impeccable integrity, and who is someone who has the experience to know how the CIA should conduct itself. Moreover, one of the things that she did, which I think is very important, she ran the clandestine operation. The reason why I say important is that when you look at the world stage, we need a CIA that is capable of engaging in clandestine activities, something that was not possible during the Obama years.
I appreciate you, Herb London. Thanks so much for joining us today and setting us straight on this one.
Always a pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much, Gary. All the best to you.
A recent Reuters news poll shows Democrats are losing support among American millennials. 16,000 registered voters between the ages of 18 and 34 were asked if they prefer Democrats or Republicans for Congress. A plurality, 46%, said they prefer Democrats, but just 2 years ago, a majority of millennials, 55%, said they preferred the Democrats. So why the 9% drop? More of them say the Republican Party does a better job on the economy, and some political analysts say millennials don't feel any loyalty to either party. Here to set us straight about millennial attitudes is Gabrielle Boucher. She's founder and president of the Millennial Solution. So, Ms. Boucher, thanks so much for joining us. I guess this poll means it's open season in the competition for millennial votes. So I'm assuming the poll results didn't surprise you. What do they say about millennial voters?
Neither party, Republicans or Democrats, have millennials in the bag. Now, this particular Reuters poll looked at those ages 18 to 34. Typically, millennials are about 18 to age 37. So it's a massive age demographic. There are about 83 million in the United States. So when we look at millennial voting trends, we know that they really care about three top things. They care about jobs and the economy. They care about entrepreneurship and opportunity, but they also care about student loan debt relief. So whether you're a Democrat or you're a Republican, you're going to have to really couch the conversation to this generation using those three policies.
Gabrielle, do Democrats, often they've assumed that they would win the support of a majority of millennials, but this poll shows otherwise. So what will that party need to do to win more of their votes?
Certainly, Democrats have long relied on millennials to kind of be in the bag for them. And this poll, I think, showed that this generation doesn't necessarily associate with Republican or Democrat. That's actually one of the first generations where the plurality of us say that we're political independents. So if the Democrats are going to want to win millennials back, they're going to have a conversation with this generation on topics and concerns that this generation really cares about. The DNC recently launched their own campaign called #IWillVote, which is a get out the vote option to really make sure that those millennials who they do think will support Democratic candidates will come forward. And certainly Republicans, I think, are scrambling and looking for how that they can really reach and retain a millennial voter population who, for the first time in maybe this generation's voting history, really has an opportunity to vote Republican.
I think they have their work cut out for them. The Democrats do if they want to gain more of those that they've lost, because it suggested, the poll did, that millennials trust Republicans more on the economy. So are there any other issues where they're like-minded with Republicans?
Well, it certainly does have a lot to do with entrepreneurship, the economy. Keep in mind, this is the first time ever my generation has ever experienced an up economy. Most of us graduated college into a recession. And so now, the economy's evened out. Now more people are hiring than ever. Now Trump's tax policies are put in place. And so it certainly is a really empowering day and an age for millennials. But again, it's going to come down to Republican candidates speaking in a way that my generation understands. They can't rely on the old school talking points. They can't expect millennials to come on and say, I'm going to vote for this person because they're a Republican. More likely we'll be voting for someone in spite of them being a Republican. So they've got to focus on the personality and less about the politics.
And I know in 2016, a lot of millennials were attracted to Bernie Sanders and his presidential campaign. But when questioned, few of them actually knew that Bernie was a socialist. Some didn't know what that meant. So how informed are millennials on those issues?
Well, not only that, Gary, when you ask millennials whether or not they support socialism or capitalism, there's a number of different studies that actually show millennials support socialism. But when you ask them if they support the free market or government redistribution of wealth, they say that they support the free market. So it really is a war of words when it comes to reaching millennials. If you give stories, analogies, phrases that this next generation understands rather than, the old talking points, you are going to do a much better job painting the picture of what a millennial American dream could look like.
And in a day and age of communication via social media and tweets, one criticism is that many millennials don't really take the time to dig deep into the issues. They may lack critical thinking skills. So what are your thoughts on that, and how can they become better informed?
I don't think it's just millennials. I really do think that across the board, Americans have really lost sight of doing the homework and doing their research on who's running, what policies they stand for, and what it could mean for themselves and their family. But particularly a generation who grew up in the Twitter era and Facebook, where we get so much of our information from apps and while we're on our phones. It really does go back to the individual voter to find ways to become more informed. I mean, watching shows like yours, paying attention to what's going on in the news, having informed discussions. And I think that's really where my generation really needs to be challenged, is to not be an echo chamber of people who are like-minded, to seek people who maybe don't agree with you on everything. Ask them questions. Why do they think that way? Why did they vote that way? And have informed discussions rather than being afraid of conflict and not really wanting to engage someone from the other side.
Gabrielle Boucher, founder and president of the Millennial Solution, Thanks for your insights today.
Thanks for having me on.
The old saying goes, men will be men and boys will be boys, but not in 2018. It seems that after thousands of years, some people have decided it's better to redefine gender. Ideological feminists teach courses on college campuses against so-called toxic masculinity. Well, joining us to discuss society's growing bias against men and masculinity is gender studies analyst Dr. Paul Nathanson. He's with McGill University. Dr. Nathanson, so why the spreading of misandry in our society today? Who's it coming from and why?
I think the new factor, is the rise of ideological versions of feminism. Not egalitarian feminism, and the idea was that all of human history is a titanic conspiracy of men to oppress women. All of human activities and all of human history is seen through the lens of us versus them. And the result is that there's a great deal of hostility toward men, although it's not usually stated as such.
What are some examples that you found in your research, or some that you've noticed recently?
Well, I think that a lot of the rhetoric surrounding Me Too, for example, is, on the one hand, Me Too encourages women to talk about their bad experiences with men, and surely there are a lot of men who don't treat women well, but there's something called identity harassment, and that's what I'm trying to get at with the word misandry. So if you attack men at such a fundamental level that virtually everything that they do, whether it's harassing women or simply taking up too much room on the bus, which is called manspreading, even though women take up just as much room with their purses, there's virtually nothing men can do that is not attributed now to misogyny and therefore hostility toward women.
I know it seems like there's this sentiment today that single mothers can do it all. So who needs a father around? You maintain that women can't be both mom and dad. Please explain that.
My theory is that fatherhood is not the same as motherhood. It has a completely different function. The function of mothers is to provide unconditional love, especially for infants, but also older children. As children begin to move away from home into the larger world, they need to be encouraged to earn respect. And so I think that earned respect is what fathers can provide their children with. It's not as immediately gratifying as providing unconditional love. It's not really something that has much to do with emotion, although it can, but that's not the main point of it. The main point of it is to stand back a bit from your children and require that they earn something. If you don't acknowledge that kind of difference, if the only thing you require of fathers is that they help mom, do the diapers and take out the garbage, then we're really trivializing fatherhood. The message to men is, well, why should I stick around in the household? Why not just leave? If I can't do something that's necessary and distinctive, there's no point in sticking around. There is an association statistically between lack of fatherhood and lack of a father in the home and every conceivable kind of pathology, from low grades in school to risky behavior, drugs. All of these things are associated statistically with fatherlessness.
What can be done to reverse this course of spreading misandry?
I think I can only say that the ultimate solution has got to be what I call intersexual dialogue. And dialogue is not just another word for ranting at each other. It's not even another word for debate in which one side wins and the other loses. Any group that is concerned with the future of society has got to encourage men and women to come together instead of being polarized.
President Obama has called Donald Trump's decision to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal a serious mistake. But actually, the deal itself, negotiated by Mr. Obama and John Kerry, was the serious mistake. And here's why. Before he signed the accord, it's an agreement, by the way, not a treaty, because President Obama knew he couldn't muster the 67 votes in the Senate needed to ratify an Iran nuclear treaty. That tells you something right there, doesn't it? Before he signed it, Obama said his goal was not to contain the Iranians, but to eliminate their ability to develop nuclear missiles. But the deal actually allows a nuclear breakout after 10 years. So in effect, the deal only contains the Iranian program, and it trusts the Islamic regime to keep its commitment during that time. So what then? And why trust the Iranian government? Time and again, it's proven itself untrustworthy. Just look at the billions of dollars they received in cash and gold in unfrozen assets between 2014 and 2016. The Iranian leadership made a pledge to the Iranian people, promising they would benefit once oil and financial sanctions were lifted. President Trump said the United States stands with the Iranian people who continue to suffer despite the deal. The Iranian regime hasn't kept its promises to its own people. So what makes anyone think it would honor its international commitments? When he held arms talks with Mikhail Gorbachev, Ronald Reagan offered some words of wisdom for negotiating nuclear deals. He cited an old Russian maxim.
Proverjai, no proverjai. Trust but verify.
На каждой встрече вы это повторяете.
You repeat that at every meeting.
He repeated it because it's good policy. But the Iranian deal does not allow for true verification of compliance. Those who support the deal say it imposes the toughest, most extensive inspections yet. What they don't tell you is the agreement doesn't allow for the inspection of Iranian military facilities. It also gives Iran up to 24 days to delay inspections. That's plenty of time to play that old shell game. Nuke development? What nuke development? Nothing to see here. It also kicks the can down the road. After 10 years, Iran can openly resume extensive uranium enrichment and nuclear bomb development. It has already violated the spirit of the agreement by advancing development of its ballistic missile program. The Islamic Republic continues to call for the annihilation of Israel and death to the United States, while supporting terrorism and aggressively acting against the interests of peace and stability in the Middle East. Shouldn't there be a correlation, a linkage of issues and behaviors in any agreement made with an avowed enemy? How can we reward evil behavior by lifting sanctions and providing the Iranian leadership with more wealth to enrich themselves and continue to spread terrorism throughout the world? Tough talk followed by sanctions, tough actions, not bad deals work. Just ask Kim Jong-un and the 3 American hostages just released from prison in North Korea. Well, that's it from the Global Lane. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud, and Twitter. And until next time, be blessed.